So good afternoon and welcome everybody. Thank you for coming to this Fellows talk. There will be some people on this call who have experienced the 10-minute whistle stop tour for this one. For those of you that fall into that particular category, I hope you enjoy the elongated and normal version of it. For those of you that have not heard it before at all, that's absolutely fantastic. First time round is great. Very much a big warm welcome to anybody on the call today who has not previously been onto one of these. You'll have heard a few of us chatting before we got going here. We've known each other for quite some length of time, and the last time we were together was for the international conference in Greece in July. So you're actually amongst friends, and it's great to have on the call. Normally we have somebody chairing these meetings, and that somebody's normally me. So I think I'm actually chairing my own delivery today, which is absolutely fine, but it means I will be burbling for quite some length of time. The Fellows talk are intended to provide information to people who are at ECR level, to provide you with an insight into some of the work that takes place that people do who are fairly advanced within their careers, and to give you some inspiration of where you might possibly want to go in the future with your own careers. So before I get launched into unnatural cycles, etc., I will give you a wee bit of background to who I am and what I do. I started out my career a very long time ago in toxicological research, which I did for quite a number of years. And in part of that was actually involved with research into asthma. So in the early 1970s, I was working for an organisation in the UK, which was globally well known, which was then ICI, so Industrial Chemicals Industries. That got taken over and broken up, and the asthma part of that got retained by AstraZeneca and is still a global organisation. So my interest in asthma goes all that way back. Having worked with them for quite some length of time, I got married and had children, and in the 1970s, 80s, having children around was not conducive to, put it this way, there was not particularly much going on in terms of flexible working. So after a short length of time, I decided to do something which was much more family friendly and that I was very interested in anyway, and retrained to teach. And I taught for 16 years, teaching a mixture of biology, which is my first degree, and environmental sciences, which was my second degree. At the end of those 16 years, we moved to France for my husband's job. And at the time that we were leaving the UK and I was leaving that particular teaching post, I was very unhappy with the direction in which teaching was going generally. And I chose not to go back into that when we came back to the UK. However, the environmental side of things, if you like, was really beginning to take off. And I'd had a very big interest in that from being a small child, having been lucky enough to have a great-grandfather and a great-uncle and a godfather, each of whom would take me out for long walks in the countryside and show me all sorts of things out there, birds, butterflies, different flowers and things. So there were a number of things which were going wrong in the world at this particular time, and I became very interested in what was happening and how could I help. And that's the point at which I met Alex, whom I will introduce on the slide in a couple of slides hence, who is another fellow. So we've known each other for many, many years. We were both at that particular time working for the Strategic Health Authority in the UK. And it was at a time when piece of legislation in the UK, which was reflected across Europe, came into being, which was integrated pollution prevention control, and was intended that any organisation which was functional, which had quite a lot going on, had to apply to the regulatory authorities for a permit to operate. And I operated at that particular time by sitting between what was then the Health Protection Agency, which Alex was then working for, and the Environment Agency, which is our regulatory body, evaluating all the integrated pollution prevention control applications for their impact on public health. So I have spent a lot of time doing that. I still do a lot of health impact assessment through planning applications, through application from different organisations that need to have that as background to a new project, etc. So I still do quite a lot of that. However, through SEGH, you would possibly remember a few years ago that the fellows undertook to do some publications which brought together fellows from the health side of things, fellows from the very geological scientific side of things, fellows and ECRs. And Alex and I had just written one with Andy Cundy and one of our ECRs. And at the end of that time, we suddenly hit the buffers. We hit COVID. And Alex popped up at that particular time and said, Gillian, I've just been invited to write a paper. Would you like to have another go? At which point I said yes. And he said, what would you like to do? And I came up with, please, could we have another look at air pollution? And could we have a look, please, at the way in which by air pollution, but also the way in which treating it itself is not particularly helpful. So we came up, or I have to say, Alex will give me this one. I came up with unnatural cycles, anthropogenic disruption to health and planetary functions. It very much is a challenge to the natural cycles, as you'll see in a moment. So this is our output from the early part of lockdown. So without further ado, let me get into this particular paper. So you'll see there my name on the bottom of that because it's me that's presenting it today, but also, and now we don't seem to want to move on, and I couldn't get it to stay in the right place earlier on. Come on, please. Let's move on. Oh, there we go. Okay. So there's a photograph of Alex. Some of you may recognize him from either chairing some of these sessions or possibly from him being at the conference in the summer. He's certainly given plenty of presentations to SEGH during our various years together. So thank you to Alex for helping me with this paper. So natural cycles. I am absolutely certain that many of you will have been familiar with natural cycles in all sorts of different ways. So we'll start with the very easy one that's up at the top corner here. I don't know whether you can see my cursor when I do this or not, or whether you can just see the screen. But this top left-hand side, we've got the carbon cycle, very, very familiar to us all at the moment. I think you'd have had to have been hiding away somewhere for a long time to not to be aware of the carbon cycle. That's the one that we're fighting with hugely at the moment, that's causing us lots of problems. The nitrogen cycle sitting here in the middle has lots of elements to it as well, which is causing us lots of problems, absolutely and completely fundamental to providing the right amount of nitrates to keep our food being produced. So again, absolutely vital. The last one for me on the right hand side, and this is just 3 as an example, but this one on the right hand side, we've got very much the water cycle, which is the absolute imperative for life itself. So we've got a section there of natural cycles. The thing that they all have in common is that they all go round in a cycle. You would hope that they do as a cycle. That's the whole point about a cycle. If I'm talking about natural cycles when I'm teaching, I start off, asking who rides a bike with triangular wheels, to which the answer is nobody, because it would be very, very difficult to do that. The whole point about a cycle is it should run smoothly. But as a people, we have really made a mess of our natural cycles. They are all out of kilter, they're out of shape, they probably nearly are triangular, if not at the very least elliptical. So these are cycles that we would like to get back to normal. However, our unnatural cycle is one that we would like to really do away with. It's one that we don't want to have hanging around any longer. At the centre of this, we've got to look at lung disease, COPD and asthma. And we can see there that we've got a need for inhalers because of this. So we've taken our person suffering from lung disease, COPD and asthma as the person who needs the inhalers because their health is being impacted. And it's being impacted by lots of different things that are creating this ongoing unnatural cycle, a vicious cycle, we could quite reasonably say, because as we go through this, you will see that there are more problems. So what are they? So some staggering statistics. If we have a look at this, then let me move that out of the way and then I can actually read them properly. No, it's not going to work, is it? Let's, right. So I only have figures for 2019. So in 2019, 461,000 deaths and 262 million people affected by COPD and asthma at a global level. That's quite a large number of people. In Africa, asthma is the second largest cause of death after AIDS. COPD is the third greatest cause of death at a global level. And in the UK, the annual cost of asthma is £3 billion and COPD is £1.9 billion. And those are figures from our National Health Service. That's what it costs them to treat people for asthma and COPD. Okay, that's not the rest of it, just for treating it, just for the UK. Sorry, I'm struggling to move this on again. Come on, let's have you. Right. The financial side of that is the annual economic cost of premature deaths from air pollution across the countries of the WHO European region, so not entirely across the globe, just across the European region, stood at 1.431 trillion US dollars. And the overall annual economic cost of health impacts and mortality from air pollution, including estimates for morbidity costs, stood at $1.57 trillion. So that's just for Europe, remember. And that's coming from the International Commonwealth of, for Science. But those are just figures. We have to remember the human side of this. So we have an individual here. This little girl on the left-hand side is called Ella Adukisi Deborah. She was called that. She is no longer with us. She died at the age of 9, which is unforgivable. She was a little girl who suffered enormously from asthma. They lived on a main road in London. Her parents were completely unaware of the fact that living by a main road was prejudicial to her health. Eventually, at the time that the coroner's report was put in, they actually, for the very first time, said that her cause of death was associated with air pollution. That was a big, big change in the UK, and it's the first time that that has been reported. And I think, as far as we're concerned, that's the first time that in fact it has been used at any point in the globe. So this was a big wake-up call to say bad air conditions cause deaths. Like many other people, she would have been using a device to try to ease her asthma. They're very small, they're very simple, you can carry them in your pocket. It might look like one on the left, which is the press down one. It might look like one on the right hand side where you flick a switch. But either way, they are very useful little pieces of equipment that can help to alleviate the suffering. If you happen to have asthma not too badly, then it can help to prevent it as well. That's what you really want. But, sorry, I jumped slightly ahead of myself. If we have a look at the way that these things are constructed, then you can see that in the center part of this, it says there's a metal can. And that metal can is the bit that holds all the drug part of it. So we see formulation down the right-hand side, the drug substance itself, a propellant to push it out of the can, surfactants to help lungs sticking together when it's got in there, and co-solvents that help the whole thing work. Below that, there's a plastic component, which every time you push the top down, push the canister down, it enables a valve to be opened and for the medicine from that to be taken directly into the lungs of the person that's using it. So fairly straightforward piece of equipment, very easy to use. Even with small children, you can use it by putting a special nebulizer between that and the child where they can just breathe in and the parent can press it. So a very useful piece of equipment. However, if we have a look on here, we can see that the need for inhalers is actually problematic. If you have a look at the top right-hand side, again, I'm not sure whether you can see my cursor, but at the top right-hand side, we can see that this inhaler actually releases a propellant back into the globe. And that has an impact on global heating, which then causes more poor air quality, which means that this individual is back into a cycle of poor air quality and asthma being affected by it, and then a need for inhalers again. So this top bit is problematic. So just this top bit. Now, when I've said that it releases propellant, if we have a look at the bottom here, metered dose inhalers have an estimated carbon footprint of 500 grams of CO2 equivalent per dose. So a CO2 equivalent doesn't necessarily mean that it's releasing CO2. It means that it's releasing something else which has the same global warming potential as 500 grams of CO2 in this case. So each CO2 equivalent is equivalent to 1 gram. On this one, it's 500. So annually across the UK, we are releasing 1.34 megatons of CO2 equivalents, mostly from the hydrofluorocarbon inhalers, which is approximately 8% of the National Health Service annual emissions. That's a lot of emissions for one small inhaler or a subset of inhalers for however many people are using them. I live in the northwest of the UK. There's a map down here on the left-hand side of the UK. Manchester is smack bang in the northwest there, that's highlighted. The NHS for Manchester, which has a population of approximately 500,000 people, have calculated that in order to offset the amount of emissions from the inhalers which they dispense on an annual basis, they would need to change all of their street lighting to LED or plant 10,000 trees. That's an awful lot of trees in a fairly small area to which to plant them. But that only takes care of this bit at the top. There are lots of other parts associated with this. Let's have a look at some of the things that might be involved. Well, first and foremost, there's disposal to landfill. So at the end of using these inhalers, they get thrown away. There is no collection mechanism for taking these to be collected and doing something else with them. They end up going to general collection and go to landfill. When things get disposed to landfill, that then drives things further to this breakdown of plastics to microplastics, leads to poor air quality again. And here we are, we've got this inner cycle on the go now. We've got this disposal to air quality, breakdown of plastics, poor air quality, and we're back using the inhalers again. For the UK, over 35 million metered dose inhalers are dispensed annually in the UK for asthma and COPD, but only 0.5 of them end up being recycled. The rest of them end up in landfill. And in point of fact, those recycled are that no longer exists because the capacity to collect those has been removed. Okay. Once it's actually in landfill, I don't know if you can see on the on this picture of the landfill, there are towards the left-hand side of it, there are some pipes that are poking upwards. In the UK, we are required by law to collect the methane that is created within a landfill. The methane otherwise would be another global warming gas, 24 times more potent than CO2. So putting things into landfill is not a great place for them to end up. And also it means that we've lost a lot of natural resources that are locked away in that landfill. If you're really lucky, it could be a good landfill site. You can see some of the things on the left-hand side being sorted before they go to landfill. For others that don't even end up being collected, then they may very well end up on a beach like this one, looking like a very beautiful beach until you look at the top end of it and see all the litter that's there and wonder how on earth all that plastic is going to get broken down. The answer is it will get broken down into microplastics. More of that anon, but before it's broken down, it's fairly unsightly anyway. It's contamination. It's not good. So there we have a recap of that. If it gets disposed to landfill, we end up with the breakdown to microplastics, driving further poor air quality and a further need for the use of the inhalers. But that leaves us with an awful lot of other things involved with this as well. So if we actually dispose of these things to landfill, if we're not using them, then we have a need for more raw material extraction to replace them. And that involves mining, oil extraction for plastics, all of which have an impact on water quality. So let's have a little look at some of this. Yep, that's a frightening sight, isn't it? Okay, so the canister has a requirement for metals. That one is very, very big, but at least it's a rather well-run mine. We can see that there's a fair amount of equipment on there and that they've taken it down a bit at a time, taken out whatever they need to do, but it's a big operation. It's a big scar on the landscape as well. For some places, like this one, it's not quite so well run, and we can see that at the top of this quarry, we have got people living there. Okay, they are probably going to be impacted by the activities that are taking place there. Undoubtedly, some of the people that are living at the top are going to be requiring some inhalers themselves, because they're going to be impacted by that poor air quality. But that's not the least of it. As we have a look a bit further on, then there are those which are not particularly well run. And we can see one on the right-hand side here where people are just digging and extracting. And then on the left-hand side, we've got possibly the worst of all worlds, where people are working without any degree of health and safety to their own well-being, but also the fact that there's no control over what they're doing. And you can see the water that's contaminated as they're abstracting the metals there. And that water then ends up into the public water supply. It's self-contaminated, but also the fact that as soon as you start to break open the rocks and release things from the rocks, there are side contaminants that are released with it, notably arsenic. So that's not particularly good for anybody as that's happening. A quick recap of things that occur during the process of mining that impact the wider environment. Down at the bottom there, we can see our surface river, but we can also see that we've got contaminated river sediments. This effectively is a capture of the previous slide, but in word forms, if you like. We've got a slag heap on the left-hand side that it rains on that, and that goes to groundwater. On the right-hand side, we've got ingress of water as well, which causes weathering and release of further metals. That works its way down into the groundwater. And across to, you have to get quite a long way down until you can get to uncontaminated drinking water. It's not just for the metal ore. We also require oil to be drilled for providing for the plastics for the inside, for the outside of the canister. That might be on land, as we see on the left-hand side with the nodding donkey. It might be in deep ocean, as we see on the right-hand side. Each of which have their own impacts. And on the right-hand side, you can see that there's a gas flare there, where some of the gases which come up when the drilling takes place are flared off, because that's not what they're looking for. But that again has an additional global warming potential. This looks like a far cry from either of the things that we've been looking at so far. This is very decidedly an incredibly clean place where the new ones are manufactured. So we've gone from extracting all the raw materials to producing our new canisters of lung-saving medicines being produced in a sterile environment. But once they've actually provided those, the next step for those is not particularly a clean one. We're out into needing to distribute them to wherever it is that they're going. We've got a clean fleet here. We've got some fantastic slurries. They're all electric. And you may well say, well, that's okay, because we're just distributing those by electricity. That's not a problem. Well, sadly, unfortunately, yes, it is a problem. Just because you might have an electric fleet doesn't mean to say you get rid of all the other problems associated with transport. And on the left-hand side, we can see some of the things which are associated with that transport. But as soon as you take a lorry out like that, then you wear down the tyres. You start to use the windscreen wipers, which wear down. You wear down the brakes that are associated with it. So all those things that every time something goes in to be maintained that have all worn away, all of those bits that have worn away have to go somewhere. And it ends up on roads, including with some of the oil that gets lost along the way as well. So all of them get mixed up when the rain comes down and it washes down. And on the left-hand side, you can see a photograph which I took in a region very close to me, which has never been cleaned and causes all sorts of problems. On the day that I took it, you can see very clearly that it's been pouring down, it's wet and it's soggy. When that dries out, some of that gets resuspended in the atmosphere as smaller particles again. So again, we're driving poor air quality, both whilst the vehicles are moving, but also whilst they're no longer there. Some of the things that end up on the road also end up going down the drains and out into the wider environment. On the right-hand side, you can see we've got the sea moving around. And I said at the top there, chemistry happens. So just because you happen to have moved something into the atmosphere doesn't mean to say it stays in the atmosphere as the thing you would like it to be. It mixes with other things. Chemistry happens within the sea as well. So if you've got a salty environment, as you do in the oceans, there are lots and lots and lots of reactions which take place in the ocean. And then, as we will see on this next one, you end up with aerosol resuspension. Now, I've taken this from a particular publication. It's a very nice diagram, far better than I could have done it. This one's talking about PFOS and PFOA. Doesn't actually matter that that's what it is. The principle is exactly the same. So those particles which we've seen wash the ocean react with the salt in the ocean. We've got microplastics becoming subplastics, submicrons, and then they end up in exactly the same way as this does, that it ends up going to the surface. So if I go back a slide, all of this aerosol is not just seawater getting blown about, it's a mix of various different chemicals, and we have no idea what they might possibly be. And they blow for quite a long distance as well once they're actually become airborne. So if we go past that one, we can come back and we can see yet again that all of these activities that are taking place down at the bottom, the mining, the extraction, the impact on water quality, the transport, all of which mix together and give us an interaction of resuspension driving poor air quality. And guess what? This poor individual with lung disease needs the inhaler again that they need to use to relieve it. So some big numbers for you to have a look at here. From a financial perspective, the World Bank has referenced the Global Burden of Disease study as being an imperative to act on air quality, noting that the global cost of health damages associated with exposure to air pollution is $8.1 trillion US, equivalent to 6.1% of global GDP. That is a huge, huge figure. Okay, that's just for asthma from air quality. But at a personal level, if you remember a few slides back, I showed you the photo of a girl that had asthma which killed her. The impact on lives is such that 6.4 million premature deaths and 93 billion days lived with this particular illness in 2019. And for comparison, COVID-19 global excess mortality, so that's the number of people above and beyond the background level of people who died because of COVID, was an excess mortality of 3 million people over and above the 1.8 COVID deaths directly reported. That's just across 1 year. COVID's been and it's gone, and people got very vexed about it and upset about it. But that is nowhere near as big as the 6.4 million premature deaths and 93 billion days lived with COPD and asthma just for 2019. And this one continues to move forward. So what do we do? Well, let's have a look at this one in a slightly analytical way of looking at it. What's the problem? Well, it's an increase in cases of asthma and COPD. What caused the problem? Poor air quality. What did we do about it? We prescribed inhalers to treat the symptoms. What did this achieve? Possibly improvement of patient condition, definitely increased consumption of raw materials, definitely creation of a difficult to manage waste stream. Has the problem been resolved? No, it's been exacerbated. Why didn't it work? Because political will and money need to be invested in the right place. So I didn't mention earlier on, I'm actually an environmental auditor as well. And I would look at this little set of problems and I would look and say, okay, we didn't go to root cause. What we actually did was treat the symptoms. We didn't eliminate what was causing it in the first place. And for any organisation that's operationally correct, if there's something goes wrong, you don't put a sticking plaster on it, you go back and find out what the issue was. You go back to root cause. So as far as this is concerned, root cause is poor air quality. But why have we not resolved the problem? Because we need to get people together to say, yes, we will spend some money to invest to stop the problem from recurring. So why is this not happening? Well, if we have a look at this, global heating and the associated climate change, each of which impact asthma directly. So we can't do anything about those individually at the moment, but they're both contributing to it, as we saw earlier on, have been described as super wicked problems. So these have 4 key features. Time's running out. Those who cause the problem also seek to provide a solution. The central authority needed to address it is weak or non-existent. And partly as a result, policy responses discount the future irrationally. So to quote from this, these 4 features combine to create a policy-making tragedy where traditional analytical techniques are ill-equipped to identify solutions, even when it's well recognised that actions must take place soon to avoid catastrophic future impacts. So let's have a look then. What can we actually do about this? Well, at a macro level, we can go back to the WHO global imperative to improve air quality. And to help with that, we can move away from fossil fuels. We can increase public transport. We can improve infrastructure for walking. We can site schools well away from busy roads. And we can move to a truly circular economy. So all of those extractions that we were carrying out to replace the non-functional inhalers would actually not be required anymore because we're no longer using virgin material. And we can get the relevant parties talking to each other and no more siloed activities. So no looking and saying, well, the air quality is nothing to do with me and the asthma is nothing to do with me either. We can let the doctors treat the asthma and we can get the people to stop travelling by plane because it's nothing to do with us. But that doesn't deal with any of it at all. It needs everybody to sit down and respond to it. At a micro level, a very straightforward one would be to enable recycling of inhalers. In the UK, we have lots of recycling facilities and mechanisms. Inhalers is not one of them. I doubt very much whether there's anything that, well, certainly when we were doing this research from the manufacturers, there is nothing in place for them to take the inhalers back at the end of their life. And I should add at this particular point that the end of life isn't necessarily when the inhaler is empty. There are people who have them prescribed for them, who maybe only use them 2 or 3 times, and then they become out of date. So when they go to landfill, they're still full with the propellant that causes the global heating. So we really want to break this down. This is an unnatural cycle. It's one of our own making, and it's one which we really need to pull out all the pieces from it to stop it from functioning. That's really where we want to go to with it. But to quote my great hero, John Muir, doesn't it always seem to be that when you try to remove one thing, you find it connected to everything else? So as we look back there, everything is connected to everything else. You can't act on one bit without acting on all of the others together in order to be able to pull this apart. So all I can say at this particular point is thank you. And if you'd like to have more information about it, there is the reference to it for going and having a longer look if you want to read a bit more about it. And I will stop sharing my screen and stop talking for a moment and say thank you, and hope I can see you all. There we go. I can, right, okay. So I know that there were some messages which were popping in. I will see if I can find them. Oh no, the chat's gone. Is that because I've come out of that? Somebody help me out. No, I've lost what was in the chat. Did anybody else? Did anybody see what was in the chat earlier on?
I think it was just various hellos.
Right. Okay. That's absolutely fine.
I can't see any specific questions in the chat at the moment.
Okay, that's fine. In that case, let's just throw it open. If there's anybody wants to ask anything, do please jump in. Okay, well, whilst I'm waiting for anybody to come up with a question whilst they're feeling fairly shy, it's probably worth pointing out at this particular juncture that having described who I am and where I fit into SEGH, that we're very much geochemistry and health. And as you'll probably have guessed at this particular point, I'm very decidedly from the health side of things. We are very much a broad church, and we pull together the two sides of both geochemistry and health to have a look at how the other side operates. And we do have lots of cooperation. But I'm also unusual in another way, in that many of the people who guest on here are from academia, and I am not from academia either. I am self-employed and have been for the last 22 years. So I get involved in research, which I really enjoy doing. I get involved in editing our regular monthly journal as well. So academia is not somewhere where I work. Having said I taught for 16 years, that's slightly different, and you definitely don't get involved in research when you're when you're teaching. But the research part is actually really important. And SEGH pride themselves very much on the journal. It includes some really interesting papers. So that was my bit of input for that, and our and a plug for you to go to that particular point. So, oh, okay. So I can see a question down here from Aki. Now I've lost that again. What am I doing wrong here? New message down there. How do we raise the funds for the change that is inevitable, especially with the ballooning global debt stocks across the nations? Wow.
Well, Gillian,
Oh, that's quite.
as I said at the beginning, your title was very challenging. And to be honest, I'm surprised of all the data that you have presented. I mean, I was not aware of all these problems. And personally, I think the problem is going to become worse and worse as we have climate change.
I wouldn't disagree with you at all on that. I really wouldn't disagree with you. I'm sitting and watching it. I mean, if I said to you earlier on, have things quietened down at all in Greece, but you've had all the fires, which they're quite clearly not man-made in as much as you didn't set fire to the forest, but the output from that is without doubt going to contribute to poor air quality for some length of time. You had the torrential rainfall, which will have cleared the air a bit, but as we've just seen, that doesn't get rid of the problem. But if we go back to root cause, then why were the forests setting on fire? Why have you had far more fires than usual? Well, that very much is about humankind impacting and humans impacting on the climate. There's no doubt at all that this is man-made. We're actually just suffering some of the problems of our own incredible stupidity, really, is where we are. So yes, it absolutely is going to get worse. I'm just looking back at Aki's question. I'm trying. I really don't want to ignore this one, but how do we raise the funds for the change that is inevitable, especially with the ballooning global debt stocks across the nations? And I think the answer to your question, because I think that's aimed at climate change in exactly the same way that Alikos has just alluded to. My personal viewpoint is that those who have polluted absolutely must pay. That doesn't necessarily mean as individuals. It means the people who've gained the most from it. If we go back to Henry Ford and his motor car, he sadly made a wrong decision. There was a fork in the road at that particular point. Do we have a hydrogen-fueled vehicle or do we have an oil-fueled vehicle? And he made the wrong decision and said, well, we've got plenty of oil, we'll go with oil. Had he gone with hydrogen, we'd have been in a completely different position at this particular point. There have been, I mean, I said a few moments ago, we've been pushing really strongly to move away from fossil fuels for quite some length of time. But the fossil fuel lobby has been very, very strong, particularly in the United States, but also across Europe as well. In fact, let me take the gloves off completely, across the entirety of the developed world. And they really, really do need to play a much bigger part in trying to put funding into the right place to offset this. So BP have a phrase that it's no longer British Petroleum. They now actually want to see that as beyond petroleum. And they're making noises that they are improving air quality by moving to wind power and solar power. But that doesn't clean up the legacy. So the legacy is going to last for quite some length of time. And to try to clean that up is going to be a difficult one. There is legislation coming through the UK and the rest of Europe. We are still part of Europe, even though we're no longer the European Union. So there is legislation coming through to try to improve air quality. The UK at the moment is going backwards. There's arguments about not doing things which had been agreed when we were still part of the EU, which I find very sad and very short-sighted. It's a very political thing, and it annoys me hugely. So, but there is money around. There is very definitely money around which needs to be used for improving people's health. If you could, if we go back to some of those slides that I put those big costs up there, if we look at those costs for treating people, that's money that we don't need to share if we don't have to treat them. If people are living healthily, then that's money that's saved. So it's invest to save. We need to invest to make people better. We need to invest to make the global temperatures more comfortable. We need to move on. So I will get off my soapbox. I mean, you know, this, I'm afraid, is light blue touch paper and retire, because a lot of this makes me quite angry that we haven't moved as fast as we could have done and should have done. I hope that answers your question, Aki. It's about as far as I can go with it.
Anyway, I think there are a lot of political decisions that must be taken.
Yeah.
And okay, legislation is there, but how do you enforce it? And also, how do you supervise the contaminating activities strictly and stop all contaminants to sort of be released in the air? So this is the big question, Gillian.
It is.
I think that's
I
why
can speak for Europe.
I see the politics in war now.
Yes.
Just think how much dust has been generated.
Absolutely.
From the bombs.
Absolutely. I don't know if you remember back to SEGH in Southport in 2013, 14, there and abouts, when Christina, whose surname escapes me for the moment, was talking about precisely that. And her role is to go in and have a look at the contamination which is created following any particular conflict and what's left behind. And it is seriously problematic at the local level, but it's also problematic at the global level, because, as one of my slides said, what goes up must come down, and it doesn't stay where it's released. We in the UK, at least 3 or 4 times in every year, end up with our cars and homes being covered in orange when we get Saharan dust being blown over. So you'll get a dust storm in the Sahara. It lifts up into the higher environment. It blows across from there, and then it here and it deposits it on us. So, you know, stuff moves around. It doesn't stay where you release it. So, and you can see the same thing again from Chernobyl. That went around the globe at a very rapid rate. So yeah, it's problematic. And it's not just where you've released it. It moves. It doesn't recognize boundaries. It doesn't have fences there saying you can't cross from here because you were released from there. It goes where it wants to. And
the question is, how do you sanction governments for their illegal proceedings? For example, the UK is sending depleted uranium bombs to Ukraine. Can you imagine the problems that we're going to have?
Yes, absolutely. So yes, I mean, but should we start with first principles then? Let's not have any more wars. Can we take out something that bothers me, which is that we keep seeing people like Trump, like Putin, like our last but 5 prime ministers, so Johnson, they're all being labelled as strong men. I don't see them as strong men. If they were strong, they would actually say there is no room for this. To me, they're all big bully boys. They were bully boys when they're playground and they weren't stopped. Now they do it with their followers at the top, and they're only in power as long as they've got somebody who sits behind them and who says, oh, yes, that's wonderful, that's fantastic. They're not challenged by people. They don't actually stop and look at what's right and what's wrong. And until we get rid of that kind of, how can I describe it? Narrow-minded, self-interested government, then yes. But that's in the ballot box. But then if the ballot box doesn't have the names of responsible people on there for you to vote for, difficult.
That is the problem. Do we have responsible politicians?
No.
All over the world?
No. In a word. So that's actually quite a good set of discussions. I'm not seeing any more. I'm not seeing any more coming in. There's a lot of people who have left, unfortunately.
I'm silencing myself.
No. That's not the point. I think there were quite a few people who jumped in, but then didn't stay. So there's still 18 people on there. Let me see. No, I can't see. Are there any more questions, or shall I bring this recording to an end? I will take that as a deafening silence of Friday afternoon, and I'd like to go and do something different. So that was the first of this year's sessions. I slotted it in there just to give us a bit of a warm up until we really get going. Please keep watching the website, and Jerry will be sending out information on the next ones which are coming up, and I hope to see you on the next one. So thank you very much indeed for your time and for listening, and take care. Thank you, Alikos.